At the inheritance meeting, my brother confidently declared, "Mom and Dad are giving all 8 rental houses in Florida to me." "Tegan, too bad. You're getting nothing." Everyone cheered. I just smiled and said, "Dad, you really don't know, do you?" He froze, as if his heart dropped. My brother screamed, "No." "What?" The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of years spent waiting for a moment like this. My brother, Michael, was standing at the center of the room, like he had done 1,000 times before. His posture was straight, chest puffed, his smile wide and proud. His voice carried effortlessly across the room, hitting every corner with the power of someone who had always been the family's star. Mom and Dad sat beside him, beaming. They were proud, of course. Proud of him, of what he had done. Proud of him for being the one who always knew how to fill the room, how to make every word count, how to make people laugh, and more importantly, how to make people listen. And then there was me. The one who had learned early that silence could be a shield. The one who sat back, always in the background, never demanding attention, never needing it. I had always been the quiet one. The one who kept my head down and did the work. The one who didn't complain when things didn't go my way. I had learned to be content with the scraps, to keep my distance and pretend it didn't hurt. When Michael finished his announcement, a laugh bubbled up from the crowd. A cousin whistled in approval. The clinking of glasses echoed from the kitchen. And my mother, ever the proud matriarch, wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. She was so proud. Proud of Michael for taking charge, for stepping into the family business, for carrying the weight of all that legacy on his shoulders. And proud of herself, too, for being the one who had raised him, shaped him into the man who was now the center of it all. But I couldn't join in the laughter. I didn't clap. I didn't shift in my seat. I just sat there, still, watching. I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, suffocating me with every passing second. They assumed I would smile and nod, just like I always had. They assumed I would stay silent, just like I always did. And I almost did. But then I didn't. The noise in the room thinned, and I couldn't hold back any longer. My smile came, small and controlled. But my words felt like they could shake the very foundation of this family's carefully constructed world. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "before you all get too comfortable, there's something you don't know." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Even Michael's smirk faltered. The confident shine in his eyes dimming for a fraction of a second. His fork, halfway to his mouth, stalled in the air, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. His face twisted, a flicker of confusion crossing his features, before he recovered, his grin returning, but now more tightly wound. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of the room shifting. My father, sitting at the head of the table, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. But there was something there, something familiar, something that reminded me of all the times I had tried to make my voice heard, only for it to be drowned out by the sound of my brother's laughter. Michael's gaze snapped toward me, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing. "Know what?" he asked, his voice rising, his confidence faltering just slightly. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence hang there, thick and heavy, like a storm cloud ready to burst, and in that silence I felt something shift. Something I hadn't felt in years. Power. A power I didn't know I had, but one that had always been mine. I smiled again, but this time it wasn't for them. It was for me. A quiet, deliberate smile. A smile that said I had finally stopped waiting for permission to be seen. And then, just as the silence threatened to swallow us whole, I spoke again, my voice steady and clear. "You don't know what I know, Dad. But you will." The words landed with a thud. My father's eyes widened, and Michael's smile faltered, just for a moment. I didn't give them time to process. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to justify anything. The truth was out, and there was nothing they could do to stop it now. This moment, this quiet, simple declaration was mine. I had always known where I stood in this family. Or rather, where I didn't stand. The first time I realized how small I was compared to Michael, I was about 7 years old. We were at a family gathering, something typical, a summer barbecue in our backyard. The smell of grilling burgers mixed with the faint scent of fresh, cut grass, the air heavy with the buzz of cicadas in the trees. Everyone was gathered around the table, laughing and joking. My brother, as usual, was the center of attention. He stood tall, hands on his hips, a joke on his lips, as the crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. He had that kind of presence, that ability to make everyone feel like they were part of his world. And me? I was the kid in the background, eating my hamburger slowly, my eyes watching the others, waiting for someone to notice. "Hey Sawyer, pass the ketchup." My dad called out. It wasn't that he didn't care. It's just that he never really saw me the way he saw Michael. Everything was always about Michael. His birthdays were the grand celebrations, balloons, cake, friends everywhere. My birthdays, on the other hand, were quieter affairs. My mom would pick up a cake last minute, usually something from the store. There would be a few gifts, sure, but it was the kind of quiet birthday that no one really talked about. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't mind at first. I learned not to mind. You make peace with being the second choice. It becomes a part of you, like the way the sun rises and sets each day. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. In school, it was the same. The teachers always mixed up our names. Michael. "Oh, sorry." Every time. They never got it right until Michael laughed, and then they'd correct themselves. I never said anything. I never complained. It was just the way things were. He had the charm, the confidence, the loud voice that made people listen. I was the one who finished my work early, sat quietly, waiting for someone to notice. When I asked for extra tutoring in math, it wasn't a big deal for me. I knew the answer before they even finished explaining it. But when Michael wanted new sports gear, there was never a hesitation. Money was tight, they said. "We'll figure something out for you next month, honey," they'd say to me. But the very next week, there was Michael with a brand new set of football pads. He was always getting what he wanted. Always. And I was the one who quietly accepted it, never asking for more, never raising my voice. When I got into the university out of state, it wasn't celebrated the way I had hoped. My father didn't hug me or tell me he was proud. He just said, "Well, someone has to leave Florida eventually." My mother was practical, of course. "It's good for you to go. You won't be a burden anymore." And just like that, my moment of achievement slipped away, without a single recognition of the work I had done to get there. I wasn't the golden child, the one everyone thought had the world in her hands. I was the one who got the scholarship, because I had worked hard enough, but it was just seen as something that needed to happen, like it was expected of me. After all, Michael was home, taking over the family business, effortlessly stepping into the role like it had always been his. I left for Atlanta just 2 days after my 22nd birthday. I packed the back seat of my old car, and as the last traces of Tampa dissolved in my rearview mirror, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I didn't know then how much I needed to leave, how much I needed the space to breathe, to be someone other than Michael's sister. Atlanta was everything Florida wasn't. The city felt alive, electric, full of people who didn't know my name, who didn't care what I had done before, who listened when I spoke. I rented a small apartment, got a job in a downtown office, and for the first time in my life, I was seen. There was no shadow hanging over me. I was just Sawyer, nothing more, nothing less. But just when I thought I had finally started living a life that belonged to me, my grandmother called. She lived in St. Petersburg, in a house that smelled like sea air and old paper. Every summer, we'd visit, and I'd spend hours with her, listening to her stories about when she was younger, when she had built the family properties with her own 2 hands. She was the only one who never compared me to Michael. She never needed to. She saw me. Really saw me? Not as Michael's sister or the responsible one. Just me. So, when she asked me to visit, I didn't hesitate. I drove the long stretch of highway, the heat of Florida creeping back into the car as I neared her house. I had no idea that when I got there, everything would change. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The house looked the same, paint peeling at the edges. the screened porch still creaking in the wind, the smell of salt water in the air. She was waiting for me on the porch, as always. Her glasses perched on the edge of her nose, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't smile right away, but she didn't need to. She was calm, always calm. She didn't waste any time. As soon as I sat down beside her, she handed me 2 folders. She was steady as she spoke. "Sawyer, I need you to look at these. There's something you should know about the properties." I opened the first folder. Payments, expense logs, rent records. Lines that didn't add up. Categories marked repairs, but there were no receipts to match. The numbers didn't make sense. And at the bottom of the page, a note, siphoning. Written in pencil. Her voice was steady, but her eyes told me everything. I gave him access because he said he wanted to learn. I thought he was helping, but it turns out he learned something else. My hands froze over the papers, the weight of the revelation sinking in. My brother had been taking money from the properties, and no one had noticed. No one except for my grandmother. She handed me the second folder, and inside there were deeds. The properties weren't just hers, they were mine now too, and I would be the one to take them over when she was gone. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The air between us was thick with something unspoken, something heavier than the words I could have said. This was my chance, and I knew it. I understood that this moment, quiet as it was, would be the turning point of my life. And so, without hesitation, I signed. The call came late in the evening, just as I was finishing up a long day at the office. I'd been staring at spreadsheets all day, a blur of numbers swimming before my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this disconnected from everything around me, this numb to the world. It wasn't a bad kind of numb, just a kind of quiet. Atlanta was still new enough that I didn't yet know my neighbors by name, but I knew their routines. I knew the sound of cars rumbling by in the early mornings and the hum of coffee shops opening around the corner. It was peaceful in a way, but it wasn't home. Not really. When my grandmother called, I was sitting at my small dining table, flipping through an old book she'd given me years ago about Florida's history. There was something comforting in the pages, something steady and familiar that grounded me, when everything else in my life felt uncertain. The moment I saw her name flash on my phone, I felt a jolt, a rush of warmth in my chest. She was the only person I felt truly seen by. No one else ever asked me how I was, not really, but Grandma always did. She always saw past the mask, past the version of me I had to be for everyone else. "Hello?" I answered, my voice more tired than I intended. "Sawyer." Her voice came through, soft and steady, like it always was. "I need you to come down here. There's something we need to talk about." I wasn't sure why, but something in her tone made me hesitate. It wasn't the usual warm invitation to come visit. This felt different, serious. I told myself I was imagining it. But something in my gut stirred as I agreed to come down the next weekend. The drive down to St. Petersburg felt longer than it ever had before. The highway stretched ahead of me, the golden light of the setting sun flickering through the trees. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin as I rolled the windows down. Florida always felt like home, in a way, even though it had never really been mine. I was a stranger here, now. I hadn't lived in St. Pete for years, but it was where everything had started, where the family had built their lives, their empire of rental properties. It was where my grandmother had kept the family grounded, steady, through everything. I hadn't realized how much I missed the place until I was nearly there. When I pulled up to her house, the familiar smell of the salty ocean breeze hit me before I even got out of the car. The house was just as I remembered it, the paint fading in spots, the yard lined with wildflowers. My grandmother was waiting for me on the porch, just as she always had. The screen door creaked as I approached, and she looked up, her glasses perched on her nose. She wasn't smiling, but there was a softness in her eyes, a kind of calm that made everything else feel a little less heavy. We didn't waste time with pleasantries. She gestured for me to sit next to her on the porch swing. The wood creaked under our weight, the slow rhythm of the swing offering a momentary comfort. I had expected her to talk about family matters, maybe about how my parents were, or how everything was going with the properties. But this was different. There was something about her that told me this wasn't a casual chat. Without a word, she handed me 2 folders. The first one was thinner, filled with documents I immediately recognized. Rental payment logs, expense reports, lists of tenants. But something was off. The numbers didn't add up. I flipped through the pages slowly, my eyes scanning the figures, trying to make sense of them. I felt my stomach drop when I realized what I was looking at. The rent payments, the repairs, none of it matched up. The figures didn't add up in a way that suggested mistakes. It was deliberate. Someone had been siphoning money. And that someone was my brother. My hands shook as I reached for the second folder, the thicker one. It was heavier, as though it held something more important, more serious than the first. Inside, I found the papers that made my breath catch in my throat. A living trust. The properties, the houses I'd grown up around, the family business that had been passed down for generations, were legally part of a trust. And I was the successor. Grandma's voice was steady as she explained. I didn't want to leave things in his hands. He thought he was entitled to it, but he wasn't. I knew you'd be the one to take care of it. You've always done the right thing, Sawyer. Always. Her words hit me harder than I expected. There was no anger in her voice, just a quiet recognition of what needed to be done. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't need to. This was the moment I had been waiting for. For so long, I had been overshadowed by Michael. But now, I had something more than just a quiet existence. I had power, responsibility. I had control over the very thing he had taken for granted. I signed the papers without hesitation. There was no drama, no long speeches. I didn't need to say anything. I just took what was mine, and in doing so, I took control of my own future. My grandmother poured 2 small glasses of bourbon afterward. I didn't drink much, but in that moment, it felt right. We clinked our glasses quietly, the weight of everything sinking in. I'm glad it's you, she said, her eyes soft. You've always been the one who sees things through, no matter how hard it gets. Just remember this: the paper outlives promises. I didn't fully understand the weight of her words at the time, but I did then. After she passed away, everything I had signed that day would be what truly mattered. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my chance to finally step into the life I was meant to have. No more waiting for permission. The drive back to Florida for my grandmother's funeral felt like a blur, each mile slipping by without meaning. It wasn't just the road that felt endless, it was everything. There were no more calls from her, no more quiet moments on her porch, no more advice spoken softly, like she had all the time in the world to guide me. The house, which had always felt like a safe haven, now seemed empty, hollow. Even though I had prepared myself for this moment, it still felt like a part of me had been taken. The ache of loss was a constant presence, sitting in the seat beside me, never once letting me forget what I had lost. The funeral itself was a quiet affair. Nothing extravagant. My grandmother had never been the type to want fanfare. The service was held at a small chapel near her home, the air thick with the scent of lilies and damp wood. I stood at the back, watching as the small group of family and friends filed in. It was strange, knowing that all these people were here for her, but none of them really knew her the way I did. They only saw what was on the surface. They saw the property, the success, the family name. But none of them had seen the woman behind it all, the one who had raised me without judgment, without comparison, the one who had always known exactly who I was. After the service, I stood by the door as people filtered out, offering my quiet thanks and goodbyes. My mind kept drifting back to the folders she had given me. The trust. The properties. The secret I hadn't shared with anyone yet. There was no question in my mind that I was the one who needed to handle things now. Michael would never understand. He had never cared enough to understand. He had always been too wrapped up in himself to notice anything beyond his own success. I had come to terms with it, in my own way. But now, with her gone, I had to act. Later that night, after the last of the relatives had left, my mother called. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed, as though she had been preparing herself for this conversation for weeks. "Stay one more day," she said, her tone more pleading than I expected. "We need to talk about the properties. It's important." I didn't need to ask what she meant. I knew exactly what this was about. I had expected this moment. It had been coming for years, but now, with my grandmother's death fresh in everyone's minds, it felt like it was happening faster than I could prepare for. I agreed reluctantly to stay. The next morning, I found myself sitting at the same dining table where I had spent countless hours growing up. The table was set up like a business meeting, with coffee cups arranged in a neat row and legal pads ready. My father sat at the head, like the chairman of a board meeting. My mother hovered behind him, fussing with napkins. Michael sat opposite me, his posture relaxed, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He knew what was coming. I had known for years. But I wasn't about to make it easy for him. My father pushed a single sheet of paper across the table to me, his voice calm but firm. "This is just a simple form," he said. "A waiver. Since your brother has been managing everything here in Florida, it only makes sense for him to take full responsibility. This just prevents confusion down the line." I didn't touch the paper right away. Instead, I studied it carefully, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The room was still. The only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Michael was watching me, his expression one of impatience, as though he already knew I would give in. He had always been so sure of himself, confident that the world would fall in line with his desires. But this time, it wasn't going to be that simple. My mother spoke up then, her voice tight, almost pleading. "It's nothing personal, sweetheart. You're building a life in Atlanta. He's here. It just makes sense, that's all." I glanced at her, and then at Michael, who was now tapping his pen against the table, his impatience cracking through the calm front he always tried to put up. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his legs out, as if the entire room belonged to him. "Come on," he said, his voice carrying the edge of frustration. "Just sign it. No lawyers, no drama. Let's keep this clean." I reached for the paper then, lifting it with 2 fingers. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't need to. The signature line was waiting for me. It was as if they expected me to just erase myself from the family, to let go of everything I had a claim to without a word of protest. But I didn't sign it. I slid the paper back across the table, my hand steady, my resolve firm. "I'm not signing this." The words didn't shout, didn't rise or fall in pitch. They just hung there, solid and undeniable. The room went still. Michael's eyes widened, his jaw tightening in disbelief. My father's eyebrows shot up, a familiar scowl crossing his face. "Don't start," he warned me, his voice low, the tone of a father who used to scold his children for staying out past curfew. But I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping across the floor. The noise of it was enough to break the silence. I didn't explain myself. I didn't have to. I didn't need their approval anymore. "I'm not signing it," I repeated, my voice softer this time. "You'll have to deal with it." I walked toward the door without another word. Michael scoffed under his breath, but I didn't stop to look back. "She'll come around," he muttered, but I knew better than to think that was true. I didn't let it bother me. I didn't let their words follow me. I was done waiting. I was done bending. I didn't go back to Atlanta that night. The weight of what I had just done, what I had just claimed, settled into my chest, filling me with a strange kind of peace. I wasn't looking for validation. I wasn't looking for approval. I was looking for control, and for the first time, I felt like I had it. The next morning, the air felt different. The sun came up over the horizon, and the world outside seemed to keep turning, unaware of the quiet revolution that had just taken place in the small dining room of my childhood home. I didn't check my phone, didn't read the messages from my parents or my brother. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had made a choice. A choice for me. And that was all that mattered now. The following morning, I woke up to the dull gray light filtering through the blinds of my childhood bedroom. The room felt colder than it had the night before, the walls almost pressing in on me. It wasn't the kind of room that felt like home anymore. It was a reminder of everything I had outgrown, everything I was leaving behind. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of it, staring down at a decision I hadn't been able to undo. I hadn't expected my father's reaction to be as strong as it was. His face had paled when I refused to sign the waiver. It wasn't just shock, it was disappointment, like he had truly believed I would fall into line like I always had. My mother's silence had spoken volumes too. She had looked at me, eyes wide, as if waiting for me to say something that would make it all okay. But I didn't. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need to. The truth was simple. Even if it was hard to accept, I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the one who quietly accepted whatever role I was given. I wasn't going to keep bending to their will just because they thought I should. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the house around me seemed to hold its breath. My thoughts kept drifting to the folders I had signed, the trust, the deeds, the properties I now had a legal claim to. It was a lot to take in, even now. But it wasn't about the properties. It wasn't even about Michael's betrayal, though that had certainly stung. What it really came down to was this: for the first time in my life, I was the one with the power. I was the one who got to decide what came next. The car ride back to Atlanta was quiet. I didn't put the radio on, didn't bother with music. The hum of the road beneath me was all I needed. Each mile that passed felt like a little more distance between me and the chaos I had left behind. It wasn't just the properties or the family drama that I was escaping. It was the weight of being someone else's shadow, of being a person who was always just good enough, but never quite enough to be seen. When I got back to my apartment, the stillness was a relief. The city was just beginning to stir, the hum of early morning traffic creeping through the streets. But here, in my small apartment, there was a peace I hadn't known in years. I hadn't realized how much I needed that quiet until I had it. The noise of my family, the pressure to conform, it all faded away. And for the first time, I could hear myself think without the constant background hum of expectations. I took a deep breath as I sat down at the small desk by the window. The air outside had warmed by now, the city light streaming in through the window. I could smell the faint scent of coffee brewing from the cafe downstairs. The morning felt calm, like it was giving me space to settle into the new life I had started building. I was going to need it. Because the next steps would be the hardest. The thought of going back to Florida, facing my family again, was something I wasn't sure I was ready for. But there was something else that felt more urgent, more pressing. It wasn't just about the properties. It was about showing them that I wasn't the person they thought I was anymore. The one who would quietly accept whatever scraps they gave me, the one who would always step aside for Michael. As I sat at my desk, I opened the fireproof folder that contained the trust and the deeds. The weight of the documents felt like a finality. The papers were no longer just forms, they were my voice. My answer? I laid them out on the desk one by one, each one a quiet declaration of what I was about to do. This wasn't about revenge. It was about claiming what was mine, what had always been mine, and stepping into a future where I wasn't anyone's second choice. I printed a few copies of the records, the financial statements, the payment logs. I didn't need to be aggressive. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was the truth, and the truth was there, in the records. It was undeniable. I was ready. I took one last look at the papers and the quiet apartment around me. This was it. I was doing this for me, not for anyone else. There was no going back. The phone buzzed on the table, a message from my mother. I picked it up, expecting something vague, something that wasn't really an apology, but was meant to feel like one. Let's keep the peace. The message read. You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting her words sit with me. It was the same old pattern. She was trying to convince me to back down, to come to some kind of agreement, but I was done agreeing. I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. Wasn't going to let them assume I would just bend to their will. I didn't respond to her message. There was nothing to say. I was done explaining myself. It was time to show them who I really was. I slipped the papers into an envelope, then packed a suitcase. Nothing flashy, just the essentials. A few changes of clothes, the documents, a flash drive with the digital copies of everything. The weight of the suitcase felt just right, the solid, undeniable weight of everything I had been preparing for. As I zipped it closed, the sound of it echoed in the quiet apartment, and for the first time, I felt like I had a direction. I wasn't sure how things would play out when I returned to Florida. I wasn't sure what my family would say, or how they would react. But I was sure of one thing. I was no longer the person who stayed silent. I was no longer the one who bent. I was the one who would take control of my future. And this time, I was doing it on my terms. The drive back to Florida was something I had been dreading for days. I had imagined it countless times, driving down the familiar highway, watching the landscape change from the quiet hum of the city to the open stretches of palm trees and rolling hills that I had known all my life. But today, it felt different. Every mile brought with it the weight of what I had to do, what I had been avoiding for so long. The truth was that the family I had left behind wasn't the family I thought I was returning to. They were still wrapped up in their own little world, and I had to break through that. By the time I reached the outskirts of St. Petersburg, the sun had begun to dip low in the sky. The golden light cast long shadows across the streets, the air thick and warm, a familiar Florida evening. I hadn't been back here in months. Not since everything changed. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, the familiar creak of the garage door echoing as I parked. My heart was in my throat as I got out of the car. It wasn't just the sight of the house, the place that had once been home. It was everything that came with it. The people inside. My mother, my father, Michael. They were all there, waiting, expecting me to fall in line. To be the daughter they thought I was. The daughter who didn't rock the boat. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The familiar smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. The faint scent of flowers from the front yard. It was all there, but it felt like a distant memory now. The weight of the decision I had made was heavy in the air around me. The suitcase in my hand felt like a reminder of everything I was walking away from. When I opened the front door, it felt like everyone in the room turned toward me at once. There they were, just as I remembered. My parents, sitting at the dining table, their expressions soft, almost rehearsed. Michael was standing near the window, his usual confident posture, but there was a tension in his jaw that I hadn't seen before. It was as if he knew something was off, but he didn't want to admit it. "Sawyer," my mother said, her voice warm but with an edge I couldn't place. "I'm glad you could come." I nodded, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't here for small talk, wasn't here to make pleasantries. Michael cleared his throat, stepping forward as if nothing had changed. "So, what's the plan? We all here to get things sorted." I met his gaze, and for the first time in years, I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. It wasn't the usual smug confidence. It was more like unease. A flicker of uncertainty that I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was because he didn't know what I was going to do next. "Let's talk about the properties," my father said, breaking the silence. His tone was measured, too calm. Like he was preparing to deliver a message that he thought would make everything better. I walked over to the table, setting my suitcase down beside me. I didn't look at the paper in front of me right away. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing I was already considering what they wanted. I just stood there, the weight of the moment pressing in on me. My father pushed the paper toward me, just like he had the last time. "This is just a formality," he said, his voice almost too smooth. "Since Michael's been handling everything here, it makes sense for him to take full responsibility. We just need you to sign this." I didn't touch the paper. I didn't even look at it. Instead, I looked at my brother. His posture was still relaxed, but the tension in his shoulders was unmistakable. He was waiting for me to do what he expected. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction, not signing it. I said, my voice low but firm. The room went quiet. My mother's eyes widened. Michael's jaw clenched. My father leaned back in his chair, the calm in his face starting to crack. They were all waiting for me to explain, to back down, to make everything easier for them. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I had come too far to turn back now. What do you mean, you're not signing it? Michael's voice was sharp, his irritation starting to break through the veneer of calm he usually carried. I mean exactly what I said, I replied, my voice steady. I'm not signing it. I'm done being the one who always bends. The one who always takes the back seat. My father's face hardened, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more. But he didn't. Instead, he just stared at me, as if trying to figure out what to do next. My mother spoke then, her voice tight. Sawyer, please. This isn't just about you. We're trying to keep things simple. Michael's been here, handling everything. It just makes sense. Her words felt like a slap, like she was trying to make me feel small again, trying to remind me of my place, but I didn't feel small. I felt bigger than I had ever felt before. I'm not signing it. I repeated, my voice cold this time. I didn't need to say more. The decision had been made. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I turned and walked toward the door, the silence in the room heavy behind me. Michael muttered something under his breath, but I didn't hear it. I didn't care. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter. The evening had settled in, the soft glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the driveway. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew I had taken the first step. I wasn't the person who stayed quiet anymore, and I wasn't going to let them control me. Not anymore. I drove back to my apartment, the familiar streets of Florida fading in my rearview mirror. There was a peace in the distance, a quiet I hadn't known in a long time. The road ahead was mine, and I was finally ready to take it. I wasn't sure what I expected when I arrived back at my parents' house, but the feeling of inevitability hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. The driveway was full of cars, a clear sign that the family had gathered once again. I felt a pang of discomfort, as if I was walking into a familiar scene, but with everything shifted, turned slightly askew. The same front porch I had spent countless summers sitting on now felt like a threshold to something I could never return from. I wasn't just walking into the house, I was stepping into the eye of a storm I had started. As I stepped out of the car, the familiar smell of the flowers in the front yard greeted me, a scent that used to comfort me. But today, it felt like a reminder of everything I had left behind. The cool evening air seemed to settle over my shoulders, like a blanket that couldn't keep out the chill of what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of my suitcase, and walked to the front door. Each step felt deliberate, but it was the kind of deliberate that weighed you down, pulling you towards something you couldn't change. The house looked just as it always had. The front door, painted a soft green, creaked as I opened it, the familiar noise echoing in the quiet hallway. Inside, the tension was palpable. The sound of voices was muffled as I approached the dining room. I could hear Michael's laugh aloud, overconfident sound that made me grit my teeth. I knew what was coming. This time, I wasn't just walking into a family dinner. I was walking into a confrontation. I stepped into the dining room, and the conversation stuttered for just a moment. But only for a moment. It quickly picked up again, as if my entrance had been an afterthought. They didn't think I had the guts to come back. They didn't think I would come back and shake things up. But here I was, standing in the middle of their perfectly orchestrated world, ready to turn it upside down. My mother was standing at the head of the table, fidgeting with a napkin. She always had to have something to do when the situation made her nervous. Father, as usual, was seated at the far end of the table, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He was always the one who seemed the most unshakable. But today, there was a flicker in his eyes, something different. He wasn't sure how to handle me, and that was something I hadn't seen before. Michael, on the other hand, was the same as ever. He leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out, his hands casually resting on the table, as if this was just another ordinary evening. But there was an edge to him now. I could see it in the way his fingers tapped against the glass, the way his jaw tightened when he saw me. He had been expecting a different version of me. The one who would stay silent, who would back down. But I was done being that version. "Nice to see you again, Sawyer," Michael said, his voice dripping with the false sweetness that always made my skin crawl. "Did you have a nice drive?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed my suitcase by the door, unzipping it slowly, deliberately, as though I were preparing for something big. The noise in the room quieted. A shift in the atmosphere as everyone waited for me to speak. The moment stretched out, tense and heavy. I reached into the suitcase, pulling out the stack of papers, the trust, the deeds, the pieces of paper that had the power to change everything. I didn't look at anyone as I walked to the center of the room, where my brother still sat, a smile frozen on his face. I didn't care about his smile anymore. He wasn't the one I was focused on. I laid the papers down one by one on the table, each one a quiet statement of truth. The first deed. The second. The third. 8 properties in total, all transferred, all signed, all legal. I placed the living trust on top, its thick cover a weight in the room. Michael's eyes locked on the stack, his confident smirk faltering as he leaned forward. His gaze darted from the papers to me, disbelief growing in his expression. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rising. "What are you doing?" I didn't say anything. I didn't need to explain. My father, however, was the first to speak. He stood, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape, his voice tight. "Sawyer, what is this?" His eyes scanned the documents, but I could see the way his hands trembled slightly. He wasn't used to being caught off guard. "These are the deeds, Dad. The properties you've been so proud of, the ones you thought were going to Michael." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of the truth settle over them. They were transferred into a living trust 2 years ago. And I am the legal successor. Michael's face drained of color as he stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over in the process. "No," he said, his voice shaking. "No, this can't be right. You can't just." The family attorney, who had been quietly watching from the corner of the room, stood up then, adjusting his glasses. He walked over to the papers, reading the headers, checking the dates, the signatures. He looked up at Michael, his voice firm. "These are legitimate, Michael. I notarized the documents myself. This trust is valid." The room went quiet again. There was no laughter now, no casual comments. Just the sound of Michael's breathing, heavy and shallow, as he flipped through the papers, trying to find something, anything, that would make the situation unravel. "This is a mistake," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. But the more he looked, the clearer it became that there was no mistake. "I drove her to the notary," a quiet voice said from behind me. I turned, surprised to see my younger brother standing near the door. He had always been the quiet one, the one who faded into the background during family gatherings. But now he stepped forward, his eyes meeting mine. "She asked me not to tell anyone," he said, his voice soft but steady. "She said Sawyer would understand." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father sat down heavily, the chair creaking under his weight. Michael's eyes darted between the two of us, disbelief flashing across his face. "You knew about this?" he asked, his voice cracking. The room was still, the only sound the low hum of the air conditioning. The truth hung between us, thick and undeniable. It was done. And for the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The morning after the confrontation, I woke early. The light outside was still soft, the sky streaked with pale shades of pink and orange, as the sun began its slow climb over the horizon. It was the kind of morning that always seemed to come with a sense of clarity, a quiet promise of something new, even if I didn't know exactly what that something was yet. I stood by the window for a while, watching the city come to life below, feeling the weight of everything I had done the night before settle into my chest. I hadn't expected it to feel this way. After everything, the years of quiet frustration, the family dynamics that had always pushed me to the edges, The betrayal, I hadn't even known I was witnessing. I had expected relief. But all I felt was a strange kind of peace. A stillness, like a door closing behind me, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I hadn't gone to bed until late. My mind had been racing with everything that had happened. Everything I had laid out on the table in front of them. The weight of the truth was heavy, but it was mine now. The documents, the trust, the deeds, they were no longer just pieces of paper. They were my voice. My answer to years of being overlooked, to years of being the one who quietly accepted, who quietly faded into the background. I hadn't heard from anyone after the confrontation. No calls, no texts, no attempts to explain, to smooth things over. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but part of me had hoped for some sort of reaction, something to make the whole thing feel real. But it hadn't come. My mother, my father, Michael. They were all still trying to figure out how to deal with the situation, and in that silence, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. I made coffee, the warm steam curling up from the mug, the quiet rhythm of the kitchen offering a comfort I hadn't known I needed. It felt good, in a way, to be in control of something. To be able to make decisions without waiting for permission. As I sat by the window, sipping my coffee, I felt a shift inside me, as if something had been unlocked. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me who I was supposed to be. I was just me, and that was enough. The phone buzzed on the counter beside me. I didn't pick it up right away, letting the silence settle around me. Finally, I grabbed it, expecting to see a text from my mother, or maybe even Michael. But it wasn't them. It was a message from my brother, James, the quiet one, the one who had stayed in the background all these years. I drove her to the notary. The message read, "She asked me not to tell anyone. She said you would understand." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I hadn't expected him to reach out. I hadn't expected anyone to reach out. Not after what had happened. It felt like everything I had been holding back, everything I had been hiding from, was rushing toward me now. I thought about calling him back, but I didn't. I didn't need to. I had made my choice, and it had been the right one. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I didn't leave my apartment, didn't make any more calls. I let the world outside continue on as it always had, but I wasn't a part of it anymore. I had changed. As evening drew near, I pulled the suitcase from the corner of the room, where I had left it the night before. The feeling of the handles beneath my fingers was grounding, like the final act in a long, drawn-out play. I had made my decision, and now it was time to see it through. I packed the last few items. Some clothes, a few things from the apartment that had meant something to me, and most importantly, the documents, the ones that had started this whole thing. I wasn't leaving anything behind anymore. The family I had known, the one that had shaped me into someone I thought I had to be, was gone. What remained was me. Just me. I didn't look back as I left my apartment. I didn't need to. I was leaving that part of my life behind, and I wasn't sure when I would be back, if ever. The streets of the city outside my window were still bustling, cars whizzing by, people walking to and from their jobs, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place inside my apartment. I felt lighter, somehow, the weight of the past lifting off me with every step. The drive to my parents' house was the same as it had been before, same streets, same signs, same familiar landmarks. But it felt different now. Like the road itself was shifting beneath me, moving me forward, pulling me away from everything I had known. And I was okay with that. When I arrived at the house, it felt like nothing had changed. The same cars lined the driveway, the same familiar faces were in the windows, waiting for me to walk through that door. But I knew I had changed. I wasn't the person who had left this house months ago. I was different now, stronger, more sure of who I was. The house smelled the same, the faint aroma of dinner wafting through the air, the old familiar scent of dust and furniture polish that used to bring comfort. But now, it felt like a place I had outgrown. The people inside would always be there, but they weren't my family anymore. Not in the way they had been. I stepped inside, my suitcase rolling quietly behind me. There was no dramatic announcement, no big reveal. It was just me, standing in the same house I had grown up in, ready to leave behind everything that had held me back. They didn't look at me right away. But when they did, I didn't flinch. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The silence between us was final. It didn't need words. Some truths don't need to be argued. They don't need to be shouted or explained. They just settle into place like paper into a folder, quiet, precise, and undeniable. I had learned that boundaries aren't loud. They don't require explanation. They're the doors you close without a word, the spaces you carve out without needing permission. I had closed the door behind me when I left, but now, I was walking into something new, something entirely my own.